Yeah. So this is chapter 43. Um, so this chapter is actually kind of short. Um, I don't have a whole lot. Um, but I don't think even if like tonight is kind of short, I don't think I want to do uh two chapters. Um, I actually got it kind of messed up in my head where uh I thought the thing that happens in the next chapter, which is like um uh Judah's like big speech. For some reason I thought it happened like in this and like I like merged them together. But it doesn't. And I want to have that be its own treatment. So even if we go kind of short tonight, um we'll just leave it like that. Um, so where we left off, Joseph sent his brothers away. He kept Simeon, um, and Jacob was mad at his kids. Um, Reuben offers, and the only way that they can go back is if they bring Benjamin with them, right? And Reuben offers to Jacob that if anything happens to um, Benjamin, that Jacob can kill Reuben's two sons. Um, and so we pick up at some indiscriminate time later. Uh,
Chapter 43. Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah said to him, "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'"
so, um, so again, I couldn't like. There's no time frame here. Um, the only one that I found is the one terrible enduring word commentary that was like, "Oh, maybe this happened the following year." Okay. Now that might be the case. The main thing that I think that signals that maybe that might be an appropriate time frame is I think in one of the later chapters there's something about Joseph straight up telling them there's going to be like 5 more years of famine or something like that. I think it happens in like chapter like 45 or something like that. And so, okay, well, if they go down after the first year of the famine, well, then maybe this is the second year of the famine. So it's like, okay, maybe that's something, but it still is just like a guess for how long it is.
Yeah, I guess you'd be presuming that they went down with 9, right? They came back with like 9.
They came back with 9
stacks of food.
right?
Presumably, if each of those gets you around a month of food, then that's about 9 months. Most likely, 9 months in the future, typically the next year.
Ish.
That's an estimate.
Right.
But they left their brother there for like.
So that's one of the things that I think is really interesting. So there's a lot of, so that's what I kind of want to spend a lot of today talking about is there's a lot of not fully clear motivations discussed in the different characters in this. It's a lot of kind of just telling you what happens, right? And I mean, I really got from the feeling, especially whenever you end like last chapter, it's like, okay, they get back, they see their dad, They explain to their dad the situation. They go back right away and get Simeon, right? But no, that doesn't happen. And the thing to me that makes the most sense as to why they don't go back is because Jacob doesn't give them permission to go back, right? Like, he's the head of the household. He doesn't give them permission to go back. They're waiting for his permission, and they're waiting to take Benjamin with him. And it's quite possible that the reason why Jacob doesn't want to send them, it might partially be that because, well, he just doesn't trust them with Benjamin. But it could also be that he sincerely thinks that Simeon just is probably dead. Right? And so he's like, well, if Simeon, like, especially considering that everything that he knows about people that are in charge, people that are in power, how they deal with things, and the fact that his sons seem to have cheated this guy, maybe he legitimately is just like, Simeon's actually dead. There's no sense in you guys going back down there and risking my son. We'll see if we can just make it through the famine on our own and not worry about it. That's what makes the most sense to me, but it's not something that's like actually in the text.
Well, it's stated as much that he considers Simeon gone.
Yes.
So from that, you can take that as why they waited so long, as well as the fact that the ultimate push into them actually needing to go back to Egypt isn't that they finally decide, oh, let's go try and save Simeon.
No.
It's, we ran out of food. We need to go get more food.
Exactly.
If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Israel said, why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother? They replied, the man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our kindred, saying, is your father still alive? Do you have another brother? What we told him was in answer to these questions. Could we in any way know that he would say, bring your brother down? And Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice.
Okay. So a couple of things.
This is just a really long conversation.
Yeah, but it's really long. Well, like this all.
We've been talking about this for days now, Dad.
Well, right, and so it's kind of so because of these like repeated similar conversations that they're having, but that they're like slightly different. This is one of those reasons why like critical scholars and like more left-wing scholars will look at this stuff, and we've talked about this before numerous times about like, oh, these are different accounts that are like spliced together. And to me, really what it seems like is that what you should be noticing is the difference between what is going on, right? And we think so, right? So you just had Reuben like make this promise or whatever, and like, hey, let us go down. And for people that think that there's like two different accounts, one of them is like, oh, Jacob is just finding out for the first time that they're supposed to take Benjamin down with them. It's like, okay, that seems really weird that would be the case. Why would they go this super long time without ever explaining that to him? And also, if that was the case, why would he never question about Reuben? it makes more sense that the reason why he doesn't question about Reuben is because he already has in his head this idea about that they left Reuben there. And like, it doesn't make sense. I think it makes it a lot messier, actually, if you try to break up the accounts. It seems to be that like Jacob is just really concerned, and Jacob is wrestling with basically having to leave control of the situations and control of his family and the control of his future to his kids that he thinks are doing a crappy job of it, right? And it's interesting to me that yes, he partially, and so I think yes, he is partially going to end up relenting because they just straight up need food, right? That's there. But I think that there is also something significant about Judah's promise of protection versus Reuben's promise of protection. Namely, in that in Reuben's promise of protection, it's if something bad happens, you can kill my kids. Whereas in Judah's promise of protection, it's if something bad happens, you can kill me. Like, I'm the one to blame. I'm the one on the line. And so, in a way, Judah's promise is actually like deeper and more sincere. And whereas you could kind of see Reuben's is actually just making more of a problem for Jacob, especially in their heads. Like, right, remember we saw this with Laban, where like he considered Jacob's kids like his kids, right? So they see their grandkids as kind of extensions of their kids. Yeah. Reuben just kills his kids, and Jacob's like, "What the heck? That doesn't solve my problem."
Did you say that Jacob would kill his kids?
Yeah. If you go back in like the previous,
Yeah, but it just sounded like you made it sound like Reuben would be the one to kill his kids.
Oh no! Reuben says to his father, "Kill my two sons if I do not bring them back to you."
I feel like Jacob should have had this chance to be like, well, hold on, I have to agree to this. We didn't think. Kill my brain.
But like it's to me, it's subtle things like that in differentiation of that's probably why there are multiple accounts. And also, I think it's interesting that you also have this little bit of a criticism in there from Judah, which also explains to me that it's probably not that there are two different accounts that were spliced together. Like Judah says, if we had not delayed, we would have returned twice, saying like, the whole reason why we're not going back down there right now is because we're scared that he's going to kill us because you're not letting us take Benjamin, right? Judah's like putting that back on to Jacob, like, we're trying to do what you want us to do. And like, you're punishing us for our honesty. And it's like, yes, maybe we screwed up, so I'll take that responsibility for that. But we could be in a situation where we weren't starving right now, where we are. And I think that makes more sense of all the story being together as one thing, rather than two different accounts that are kind of poorly spliced together. But okay, let's continue.
Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother and arise, go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved."
Okay, so so they prep an offering and a gift. Most of the like commentary and stuff that I found was on like all of this stuff uh about how likely it was that they would have had like these different items and all of this stuff. Because apparently only a couple of them actually you can get in Canaan. Like I guess the myrrh, myrrh, I think it's like the last 30, maybe myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds or whatever are apparently like not really available in Canaan. So they probably traded for those from farther away, and so that they're even more precious. And so they do what they can. Jacob has like a little bit of hope that maybe they can make something happen. Plans to pay them back for what they have. But then also has this line of, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So it's interesting how different commentators take that line, because some are like, it's a real humble, like acknowledgement of his position and his plight and his status and where he's at. But then others are like, this is Jacob giving in to fatalism, and he shouldn't do that. And I'm like, that's stupid. Like,
What's fatal?
Fatalism is just like, kind of like pessimistic, just like get like giving in to like whatever will happen, and like there's nothing you can really do about it. And I'm like, well, there isn't anything that he can do about it. Like he's too old to travel for himself. He can't, and he has to maintain his own household. Like the best he can do is exactly what he does.
That's
and also I think it's a little bit interesting because it's like, if there's one person in the Bible that is used to like being at the end of his rope and just having to trust God for whatever is going to happen, like it's kind of Jacob. Like he runs into this multiple times throughout his life, right? Where he's just like, man,
sleeps on a rock on the desert.
Yeah, like I'm cast out. There's not much really that I can do. I'm gonna get I'm gonna get killed by these people. Like, so I actually think it's a really good thing that he has this notion of like, if things are going to be bad and I'm going to be sad, well then I'm just going to have to deal with that. But we don't really have any other choice. This is the best option that we have. I actually think it's like I think that's actually a sign of bravery, and is actually a sign of bravery that had he had it sooner, like Judah talks about, things would have been better. Right? Like if he had actually had this attitude sooner, it would have been better. But having the attitude of, I'm gonna sit around and hope that something better comes about, is actually the reason why they're in a worse position, right? Because they didn't do anything. And it actually reminds me a lot of what we just read about in Crew or whatever, where like there's a line of Jesus is like going back, and like, well, they're like, don't go back to that area, like they're gonna kill you. And Thomas is like, well, if they kill us, like whatever, let's just go.
Let's die with Jesus.
Right, it's that same thing. He's like, I guess we're just gonna go die with him. And it's that same the one commentary called it subdued resignation, and I really liked that line because it's just like a humble, just kind of admitting defeat as you're walking to the thing that's like challenging.
But also still like kind of reluctantly doing it with faith.
Exactly. And it's actually the thing that I find it's actually the same thing as it's the same thing as what Kierkegaard calls Abraham's leap of faith. Whenever he's like he takes his kid and he's like, I guess I'm gonna go up this mountain, right? He's like, it's not gonna help him for him to sit around and go, God, will you please give me a sign about how you're magically gonna make this thing work? And God's like, no, you need to go up to the mountain and kill your son. And it's like, no, I'm gonna sit here and keep waiting for you to tell me how this is gonna work out. Like, no, I'm telling you to go up there and kill your son. Like, okay, well, I guess that's what we're gonna go do. And it's that same level of like subdued resignation of just humbly accepting your position and where you're at. And like, I might be walking into like defeat right here, but it's the path that God has opened for me, and so it's the path that I'm going to take.
Well, and from an attitude standpoint, like the alternative, and we see this a lot in more modern storytelling, is that the alternative is to say, okay, we'll go and do this, and we'll put a little trust that everything will go okay, but if something missteps, I will vow vengeance on them and their family, and I'll do my best to destroy my opposition by whatever means necessary, and it will be tit for tat the whole rest of the way.
Still trying to have some level of control over the situation. Yeah.
And that's the common route. But when he says, "I'm bereaved," if I am bereaved, I'm bereaved. It's admitting that, like, okay, I understand that any further action I make on this is only going to bring more. Like, if this goes in the terrible direction that I have of feeling it might,
Right.
then any further action I make toward, like, personally towards trying to rectify that through like violence or some other means is going to make the situation worse. So I'm going to resign myself to an option that won't do that.
Right.
And really just move forward with faith that things will work out to the good.
And it's one of the things where, like, and this is what I try to specify with a lot of Christian stories, that, and it's one of the reasons why I like Kierkegaard's idea of the leap of faith, is that fundamentally the ability to have that attitude of like kind of subdued resignation about the situation. The only way that you can kind of genuinely have that is if you have the mindset of, even if we go down there and we get utterly destroyed by whatever happens, we're still ultimately going to win because of God, right? We have this idea of God is ultimately going to bring us back. God is ultimately going to bring about a resurrection. He's going to make everything come back together in the end. Because you have that, is kind, and you have this ultimate victory in your head where you can actually even be okay with a defeat. And that's an incredibly powerful asset. And it has served as an incredibly powerful asset in the history of the church, right? That's why you can have martyrs, right? Like, you can't have a martyr, right? Someone that's willing to die for the faith, unless they come to the realization, it's okay if I die for this, because my side and my God is still going to win, even if me and my family are wiped out from it. And it's a you become invincible, right? We were joking about playing volleyball, like we're down to 24 points. We're invincible. It's like, no, if even them killing you means that they don't win, you are invincible. And so you can then do things that nobody else can do. And yet you might die. And a lot of Christians got martyred for first literally centuries before like they had a solid grasp. But eventually it's like Christianity took over the Roman Empire and arguably the world. And it's like, and it happened because a bunch of people were willing to lose. They were willing to lose. And it ended up being that the group did not. Okay.
I think just looking at that whole verse 14, just the wording of may God grant us mercy kind of thing, and if I lose my children, I lose my children is exactly what was going through Abraham at that point. And I just it occurred to me like right before he said that, and I was like, you know what, that's probably what he said.
All right, we're gonna keep going.
So the men took this present, and they took double the money with them, and Benjamin. They arose and went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house, and slaughter an animal, and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The man did as Joseph told him, and brought the men to Joseph's house. And the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys." So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house.
So I'm going to pause it right there. So I struggled with this a bit for why exactly. So, right. So in the previous meeting scene, right, they just go and meet him. It's not at his house. So I guess it's in some kind of like official office that's somewhere else, right? That's where they meet him. And now they're making the big point about bringing it to the house. And it's unclear to me as to why they think in their head that being at the house is more dangerous. I mean, you have this line about it is because of the money which was replaced in the sacks that we are brought in, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys. Why couldn't I don't understand why that couldn't happen at like the regular office.
It's just because they always assume, and this attitude is present in Jacob too, is that they just always assume the worst outcome or worst possibility from people, and then the best possible outcome from people is incompetence, because that's what Jacob said earlier, is that, well, at best, maybe the money was just an oversight, and they'll forgive you when you bring it back, or they'll be okay with it then. So like the idea of kindness coming from someone else is so far down the totem pole that like it's impossible then to perceive it, even to the point of illogical conclusions.
I think there could be a logical reason for it too. Like in the office building or wherever, Joseph is acting in his official capacity as the right hand of Pharaoh. He can't take personal vengeance. Whereas if they meet him at his house, he's no longer Pharaoh's second hand. He's just an angry, powerful man in his home and can do what he wants.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know if
Like, if you're expecting something good, you'd think you'd be brought into like royal palace chamber, not the man's home.
I guess I don't know, because like I don't know, like it doesn't make sense to me, because like I mean, like obviously, like, well, he is bringing them there to kind of like celebrate, and like he's like gonna like lavish upon them and all this stuff, and I guess the like none of the I read like I said, I read like multiple commentaries, and like nobody really had like a great explanation for why they were scared here. Mostly it was just that like they thought that maybe it was powerful people showing off, And so maybe after the powerful people showed off, they then use their power to take advantage of them. And maybe that's something that, I mean, I'm sure that's a thing that has happened before, and it is an idea. But I struggle with why they would be particularly scared about that.
It's also probably
Um,
just a fear of the unknown because they haven't been to Joseph's house, and in their minds, they were thinking like, okay, standard procedures, you go here, and we were just kind of here on
Sure.
business, so we're gonna ask for this. And so when they get brought to a new environment they don't know, they haven't mapped this territory, they're left to ask why. And then, like I said, when they are left to fill in the blanks, they fill in the blanks in the worst possible way.
yeah,
So they get really scared.
Also, like they were last time they met this guy, he seemed extremely irrational and erratic. Just like
Yeah.
we're just humble. Like you see this big long line of thousands of people.
No, you're
we're
spies.
just getting you guys. No, we have a younger brother. Go bring him to me. What? Okay.
I mean that is true.
Like,
That
and suddenly they see people going up in these big public places, and before the king, before the governor, before whoever, and all of a sudden, hey, come to my secluded home. I've got something for you.
that could
No,
be
it
it
doesn't
too. That
seem to not make
he,
sense.
that Joe
It kind of
in
makes
their
perfect
eyes,
sense.
Joseph does do weird
Joseph is
things and plays with them and like messes with them. And so they're just like, oh crud, like we don't know what's gonna happen here. So it could just be that.
We'll never go home from this.
All right. We'll keep going.
and said, "Oh, my lord, we came down the first time to buy food. And when we came to the lodging place, we opened our sacks, and there was each man's money in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it again with us, and we have brought other money down with us to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." He replied, "Peace to you. Do not be
So-
afraid."
I was just gonna say, good peacekeeping tactics here, fellas, where you're just like, where you pay it off and you're just like, I mean, we're pretty sure that it was somebody in your camp that screwed up on this whole money deal, but we'll just say we don't know what happened with it, but here it is. Like, never blame your customer. like just be like,
Customers always right.
something bad happened here, but like we're trying to make everything right here.
Also, I feel like Joseph would actually be kind of sad at hearing that they brought the money that they were given back and more money, because that means that they didn't like spend the money, which was like kind of the intent of putting the money back in there.
Right. The first time. It's gonna get weird the second time, which we're not gonna hit fully because we're not gonna hit next chapter. But on this next time, whenever they go bad, Joseph is very clearly screwing with them. And it actually doesn't say that he's like, oh, he's doing this to like help them. It's like he's doing this to screw with them. And again, it doesn't explain the motives in on these next couple of like instances. So we have to do a little bit of inferring.
"Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. And when the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they had washed their feet, and when he had given their donkeys fodder, they prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there.
So it's interesting that it's interesting of the for the line of your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sack for you. I received your money. That first sentence, that your God and the God of your father has put the treasures in your sack to you. Very clearly true, right? Like through the means of Joseph, that is what has occurred. The I received your money. as like the audience, we're pretty sure that's a lie, right? Like that they didn't receive their money.
Originally, and then Joseph made him put it.
And then Joseph made him put it back. So there's a lot of like ambiguity with that statement of and I received your money. And be like, okay, maybe it was a like, I received your money, but then I'm just not telling you that I then put it back.
Mhm.
Or it's a straight up lie that I received your money, but I don't want you to have to pay it, so I'm not doing it. Or there was some kind of miracle that occurred, but that we're not drawing attention to, in which case they just did have their like more money showed up, but only on their end, whereas for them it was given back. And something like that kind of idea is actually going to happen like a couple of times where Joseph does straight up lie to them, and it's really interesting to me that you have this kind of like pinnacle like climactic story to all of Genesis, and you have to deal with this fact that Joseph is kind of lying to them. And it's very easy to write it off because it's like, it's for a good thing, right? Like what's happening to them in the story and everything is a good thing, and it ultimately has a good conclusion, and it makes sense, and like you understand it, and maybe you would call it a white lie. But it seems to me that like for the purposes of the story, it's not taking that like and we've had this kind of throughout Genesis, right? Of where it doesn't always take this hard and fast stance on different morality questions like what we always want to apply to certain things. Where we get to the point where certain Christians get to the point where it's like it is never okay to lie, to the point where like people like Katie's parents are like, you can't have your kids believe in Santa Claus, right? Because like that's a lie. And it's not that I'm trying to like advocate for lying, right? Because like clearly
That's
there's
what it sounds like.
it's like clearly there's problems.
Wait till we get to the next book where they say not to.
Yeah, exactly. But it's more like trying to get. I've talked to this with people before about even whenever it comes to like Rahab, because like Rahab very famously lies, right?
Also, very famously prostitutes. So.
Yes, she's not a good person.
Does that mean that they're both? Oh.
Well, should I take you back to the Judah and Tamar chapter? And
No.
where it gets very questionable, right? And it's the point that I'm trying to make is that I think ultimately, even with kind of like all things of like individual actions, right? Even actions that are not good, there's in these stories and in Genesis, there's a way in which they get redeemed and ultimately help fulfill God's purposes. And to me, the way that I view it is it's a kind of proto understanding of the grace of God, right? And we understand that like, okay, we might do things wrong or whatever, but God still forgives us, and like we can still be saved and be in communion with Christ. And it's interesting to me that like, because you'll hear people talk about like typology a lot, right? And Joseph is a very common typology for Christ. And people will throw that down left and right. And actually, in some of the commentaries on like some of the later chapters, like people are like, "Oh, this right here, this is Joseph being like Christ, 100%. You can see it. It's like the same thing. It's like, yeah." Very next line, Joseph lies and says something that's like not true to them. And I'm just pointing that out. So partially to say what I've already said about that, there was like a way in which God can redeem those things, but also to say like I don't fully know what to do with those, and they make you think. And it's made me more and more think, especially like so like the classic moral dilemma that everybody has about
The trolley.
oh no, not well.
Yes,
I mean,
it's all-
possibly the trolley, but like, okay, if you're hiding Jews in the Holocaust, are you supposed to lie to save their lives?
We were already lying by hiding. Kind of.
Are they here? Yeah, they're in the
Kind
next
of,
room.
maybe, right? Like, are you supposed to just tell like the Nazis where they're at?
They're on the plane.
They're on, yeah.
Hit him with the Pinocchio hug. No, no, they're not. Not too mean.
and
Prince Charming was the best.
I did, and so maybe this is more of a thing for me than it is for other people. But like I did used to think at one point in time, like, yeah, maybe you like are supposed to just like bite that bullet and like be honest and like, or maybe just not say anything and be willing to suffer the consequences of not saying anything. And you know, do the plead the fifth. Like you don't have to tell them, but like don't lie and tell them that they're not there either, right? And the more that like I study the Old Testament, it's not that I'm like coming to the conclusion that like, oh, lying is a good thing. You should do it. Like yeah, like yeah, spice it in, use it in your conversation. But sentence enhancers, conversation enhancers. But rather it's something like do like it, but it's more like do the thing that's wise for the situation, but also like trust in God. And if you do something wrong, like yeah, you should avoid it, but like make sure that your aim is right. Make sure that your aim and like what you're going towards is right. It seems to be something along those lines, but it still messes with me a little bit. Even like recently, actually just today, I saw actually a guy that's been on the Unbelievable podcast a number of times. There's a kind of a popular pastor in London that I guess he's described. I didn't know this, but he's described as an extreme pacifist, and he tried to make the argument that churches shouldn't defend themselves, and like that people shouldn't have guns in churches.
Oh, okay. At first I thought you meant like with words.
No. He means like he meant with weapons, and he was like so he was thinking that like churches shouldn't have guns
Like
and security and like shouldn't have security and like all this stuff.
And so if you die from an attack, you're just kind of a martyr.
Yeah, and that, like that's just supposed to be what happens. And like he was like, and it's tragic and everything and all this other stuff. But it kind of left me thinking that I was like, well, and I was like, and you think that it's tragic because like that's like his quote, but I'm like, but if that's the case, you're saying that the only kind of world in which that doesn't happen, right? Where like church shootings don't occur. The only way that can happen in your framework is if other people who are not Christians are using guns and weapons to stop the other non-Christians. So you've now just set up a system where Christians are no longer in the position where they have to rely on God. They're in the position where they have to rely on the world in order to protect themselves. And I'm just like, that seems fundamentally wrong and stupid.
That's what the Amish do.
There is well, there's a lot of
People
Mennonite,
shoot up Amish
like that actually is Mennonite, because Mennonites are pacifists. That is their
Well, they also do
standpoint.
that for sometimes whenever like they need to get around, they'll like call a cab or something.
yeah, they'll use the technology of like the world and
As long
everybody
as
else.
the other one's not driving, they'll be okay.
Right. And
Well, the telephone was invented in the 1900s. So they can use smartphones, right?
and the passage that he brought up is whenever Peter cuts the guy's ear off, and he's like, and he rebukes them for that, right? And so like that shows that we're supposed to be pacifists. And but then the counter to that, which I thought was really interesting, was everybody saying, a bunch of people were like, well, the whole reason why Peter was able to do that, was able to cut off a person's ear, is because he had a sword, right? Everybody talk, like I've heard people say like, oh, well, he steals the sword from a Roman centurion. You're not stealing a sword from a Roman centurion. That's not happening. It's like, no, they had their own sword. And also we know this because there are actually verses where Jesus says like, take a sword, like arm yourself with it. And that's for personal protection, like as you're going around, as you're traveling,
I
and
think
as you're
people
doing all
would
this
use
stuff.
that argument though, and to say, "Oh, that's only for like to protect yourself against wildlife," because they had issues with that. Just to play a little bit of
People
devil's
are,
Yeah.
advocate.
people are always gonna
Maybe.
gonna find a way.
Yeah, exactly. But like, but it's still like, and so more and more I'm finding that I think some of like our ideas, and like Pastor's been talking about like deconstruction and stuff, that some of our ideas that we have about what it means to be Christian have gotten, over 2,000 years of history, have gotten blown up and amplified to really intense extremes, which probably the Bible never actually intended for us to take them like that far. And maybe it's hard to say because, again, all of this stuff in Genesis is not prescriptive. It's not like saying this is right, this is wrong. It's just saying this is what happened. But yeah, so we'll finish up now.
When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?"
Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing, and that was that it is still unclear whether or not Joseph knew who Benjamin was. I mean, obviously he recognizes him because he's the new brother,
He's the one he doesn't
right? And
recognize.
he's the
Doesn't
one that
know.
he's the one that he doesn't recognize. But it's not clear if he had known him prior.
They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him.
Okay. So we have Joseph seeing Benjamin, right? And he gets broken up about it. Because Benjamin they're all his brothers, right? But like Benjamin is like his actual brother because they have the same mother. But then,
But if he doesn't know, if he never knew Benjamin, does he know for a fact that that was Rachel's son too? There's really no way. I mean, he knows that this Jacob guy has slept with 4 women.
and you know what? Like, that's a decent argument, right?
Oh, that's a good point, because doesn't that make him like his only Benjamin is only
real brother, full brother? Yes. And also, here's the other thing for me for that he probably does know Benjamin. He asks about his father and his father's condition, but he never asks about his mother and his mother's condition, right? And his mother doesn't die until Benjamin is born, right? And so if he doesn't even bother to ask about his mom,
Women also didn't have
Right.
then, so it's not like they had to care.
well, but like he probably would,
Joseph's a good guy.
right? Like it, like
Yes, he would.
I mean, even like
But you could
you
put
still
that-
like your
You could
mom.
put that lens on and still say that at some point
I'm not saying
it came to where God told Moses to write this, or people remembering this because it being told down the generations, where that didn't matter whether he asked about her or not. You could look at it through that lens. I'm not saying
you can.
I'm not saying that that's a really good argument, but I mean, aside from the wet nurse being talked about for no good reason, we don't hear about women talked about once they serve their big role,
Yeah.
Like when the women die, like, well, I'm sorry, who? It's just, they're kind of in the past, but
Yeah.
he still talks about the God of my father, he doesn't talk about the God of my mother. Also, to be fair though, she kind of wasn't explicitly told to follow Yahweh, but whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, she's got a whole other deal going on.
Just did it wrong.
But yeah, so we don't fully know what's going on there with that. But he gets control of himself. We have this little description here of kind of the prejudice of the Egyptians, but it's Joseph at a table by himself, and then in front of him is a table with his brothers, and then somewhere else there's another table that has a bunch of Egyptians. And so that dynamic is all kind of interesting. And then you also get the first kind of clue for the brothers that something more is going on here with this guy, where he organizes them according to their birth and their ages. And the best guess that I can tell from what's going on here with all these motivations and with what is about to happen in the next chapter is it seems like Joseph is setting up a test for them. Joseph is setting up a test for them to see if they are still hung up on their jealousy towards Rachel's kids. And again, that would only like really work if he fully kind of has that understanding about who Benjamin is and not just that he's his youngest son. Um, but he starts that off by organizing them in this way, which signals to all of them, I know who the oldest is and I know who the youngest is. And then he goes and he over blesses the youngest. And apparently there's supposed to be something, apparently like the number 5 is really significant to like Egyptians. I guess there's a bunch of different like things in Egyptian mythology involving the number 5 and it like it's significant.
That's fine.
And so that was the reason stated in one of the commentaries that I read for like maybe that's why he gives him specifically 5 times as much. It's like showing an Egyptian blessing like to him. But they enjoy it all, and whenever we come back next week will be whenever Joseph really starts to screw with them, and really starts to test them. So
I hate
Yeah.
how you can look at like him giving Benjamin more food. You can look at it as evidence for him knowing him and not knowing him. 'Cause my
yeah,
head is just like, oh well, I know him and I'm making up for all this lost time, and he's also my actual brother. But then at the same time, if he never knew him, he's like, this is the brother who didn't try to kill me, and I never.
right.
So and like that's also you could look at it as like why he goes up to the room week, because it's like, wow, I never knew this guy existed, and now he's like 30 years old, and it's like, you know, that would have hit him hard because seeing all his brothers after having last seen him again, they tried to murder him or sell him, or you
Yes.
don't really know what they did, but
a bunch of not good stuff. So any other questions, comments, things? All right. Well, we'll stop recording.
I read this thing.